The most painful betrayals are not the ones that happen behind your back. They are the ones that happen under bright lights while everyone applauds. Ava Brooks learned that truth at exactly 7:42 p.m. on a Thursday evening. The text message appeared on her phone while she sat alone in a private dressing room overlooking Midtown Manhattan. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glowed beneath a winter sky, thousands of lights reflecting off glass towers and crowded avenues. Inside the television studio, producers rushed through hallways, makeup artists adjusted final details, and executives prepared for what would become one of the most watched live broadcasts of the year. Ava stared at the message without blinking. Creative credits have been updated for broadcast clarity. For several seconds, she simply read the words again and again. Then her eyes moved slowly toward the monitor mounted on the opposite wall. The live pre-show coverage had already begun. Elegant music filled the studio. Bright graphics flashed across the screen. Smiling hosts welcomed viewers from across the country. Then Ava saw her. Chloe Harrington sat beside Nathan Whitmore beneath the glow of studio lights, wearing a flawless white designer dress and a confident smile that looked rehearsed. Beneath her image appeared a title card that made the room feel suddenly colder. Chloe Harrington, visionary founder, National Education Initiative. Ava's fingers tightened around her phone. For 6 years, she had built that initiative from the ground up. Every scholarship program, every community partnership, every fundraising strategy, every late-night proposal, every speech, every meeting held in church basements, school cafeterias, and crowded community centers. The project existed because Ava had refused to let it fail. Yet tonight, millions of viewers would believe it belonged to someone else. The city lights beyond the window blurred for a moment before returning into focus. Ava set her phone gently on the table. She did not cry. She did not panic. She did not storm toward the studio floor demanding answers. Instead, she watched. On the screen, the host praised Chloe's leadership. Chloe accepted every compliment gracefully. She spoke about challenges she had never faced, sacrifices she had never made, dreams she had never built. And beside her, Nathan smiled. That was the part that hurt most. Not Chloe. Nathan, the billionaire who knew exactly where every idea had come from. The man who had once called Ava the conscience behind his success. The man who had promised her that integrity mattered more than publicity. Tonight, he said nothing. He simply allowed the lie to breathe. Around the studio, applause erupted. Ava lowered her eyes toward the leather portfolio resting beside her chair. Inside were years of records. Original drafts. Contracts. Emails. Timestamps. Documents carefully preserved long before tonight ever arrived. Most people would have felt shocked by what was happening on that screen. Ava did not. Because this was not the moment she discovered the betrayal. This was merely the moment the betrayal became public. Slowly, she picked up her phone again. Another message appeared. This one from a senior producer. Please remain in the green room until the conclusion of the segment. Nathan requested a clean broadcast. Ava stared at the sentence. A clean broadcast. She almost smiled. The irony was impossible to ignore. Outside her door, footsteps hurried through the hallway. Inside the studio, the countdown toward the live interview continued. On the monitor, Chloe laughed beside Nathan as if she belonged inside a story she had never written. Ava looked at the screen one final time before placing her phone face down on the table. Then she glanced at the clock hanging above the dressing room door. 7:43. Only 1 minute had passed, and yet everything was about to change. 1 week earlier, Ava Brooks was standing in the glass conference room of Whitmore Media headquarters, 38 floors above Manhattan, when she first realized something was wrong. Rain drifted across the city outside like a gray curtain, softening the outlines of skyscrapers and turning the streets below into ribbons of silver light. Around the polished walnut table sat executives, producers, sponsors, and communications staff preparing for the upcoming national broadcast. The education initiative Ava had spent 6 years building was finally receiving national recognition. At least, that was what everyone believed. Ava had arrived carrying a leather portfolio filled with final reports and scholarship data. She expected the meeting to be routine. Instead, she noticed Chloe Harrington sitting beside Nathan at the head of the table. That alone was unusual. Chloe normally handled media strategy. She had never been involved in the foundation's development. Yet throughout the meeting, People kept directing questions toward her. Chloe answered with polished confidence, speaking as though she had personally overseen every major milestone. At first, Ava assumed it was harmless. Then a presentation appeared on the large screen. The title slide displayed photographs from scholarship programs, community centers, and student success stories. Ava recognized every image. She had been present for nearly all of them. But beneath the title was a name she did not expect. Chloe Harrington, lead visionary. Ava remained silent. She watched the room carefully. Several executives nodded approvingly. No one seemed surprised. No one corrected the slide. Her eyes shifted toward Nathan. He sat comfortably in his chair reviewing documents. For a brief moment, she expected him to speak, to explain that a mistake had been made, to remind everyone who had actually created the initiative. He never did. Instead, he thanked Chloe for her leadership. The words landed quietly, but they echoed louder than any argument could have. Ava felt a strange stillness settle over her. Not panic, not anger, something colder, something clearer. The meeting continued. Chloe presented timelines, achievements, and future expansion plans. Many of the stories sounded familiar because they belonged to Ava, a scholarship recipient from Detroit, a literacy program in Atlanta, a teacher grant initiative in Baltimore. Chloe spoke about each accomplishment as though she had lived every moment herself. The room rewarded her with admiration. Nathan rewarded her with approving smiles. Ava simply listened. When the meeting ended, people gathered their materials and drifted toward the elevators. Through the glass walls, Manhattan glowed beneath the storm clouds. Ava remained behind pretending to organize paperwork. A few minutes later, she noticed Chloe's laptop still connected to the conference room display system. The screen had not fully locked. She was about to look away when a notification appeared in the corner. Broadcast credit strategy final approval. Beneath it appeared a message thread. Ava's eyes moved across the screen. She read only a few lines before understanding everything. Nathan and Chloe had been discussing the public rollout for months. They had carefully planned which interviews Chloe would attend, which publications would feature her, which speaking engagements would introduce her as the face of the initiative. One sentence stood out above all the others. By the time the broadcast airs, the audience will associate the project with Chloe completely. Ava stared at those words while the rain tapped softly against the glass. Then she closed her portfolio and quietly disconnected the laptop from the display. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the Hudson River. Inside the empty conference room, Ava finally understood that what was coming had never been an accident. It had been a strategy, and for reasons she did not yet reveal to anyone, she chose not to stop it. The following morning, Ava woke before sunrise. The city outside her apartment was still wrapped in darkness, the streets below quiet except for the occasional headlights moving through the early morning fog. She sat at her dining table with a cup of untouched coffee and her laptop open in front of her. Most people would have spent the night wondering how to confront the betrayal. Ava spent hers building a record. By 6 o'clock, she had already downloaded archived project files from secure servers she still controlled. By 7, she had recovered the original proposal documents carrying her name, her timestamps, and her revisions. Every idea, every budget projection, every partnership agreement, every strategic plan. The entire foundation of the initiative existed inside a trail of evidence stretching back 6 years. As sunlight slowly painted the skyline gold, Ava worked with calm precision. She created backups, then backups of the backups. She uploaded encrypted copies to private cloud storage. She transferred additional files onto secure drives stored in separate locations. If anyone attempted to erase the truth, they would discover it had already become impossible to destroy. Shortly after 9 o'clock, her phone rang. The caller ID displayed Nathan Whitmore. Ava stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. His voice sounded warm, familiar, carefully practiced. He asked how she was doing. He mentioned the upcoming broadcast. He spoke about public expectations and media attention. He never mentioned the conference room presentation. He never mentioned Chloe. Most importantly, he never mentioned the credits. Ava listened quietly while looking at a contract dated 4 years earlier. Her signature appeared beside his on every page. The initiative belonged to both of them publicly, but the development records clearly showed who had built it. Nathan continued speaking about future opportunities. He thanked her for supporting the organization through difficult years. The conversation sounded almost sincere. When the call ended, Ava placed the phone down and stared through the apartment window. For a moment, she remembered the man she had married. The ambitious entrepreneur who once spent evenings discussing community programs over takeout containers and handwritten notes. The man who claimed success meant nothing if it could not help people. Somewhere along the way, that man had disappeared behind cameras, sponsors, headlines, and public image consultants. By noon, Ava met with someone she trusted completely. Margaret Ellis had practiced corporate law for nearly 30 years and had advised nonprofit organizations across the country. They met inside a quiet office overlooking Bryant Park. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls. Sunlight reflected off polished wood surfaces. Ava placed a folder on Margaret's desk and explained everything. Margaret reviewed documents for nearly an hour without interruption. Finally, she removed her reading glasses and looked directly at Ava. The evidence was overwhelming. Emails connected Chloe to the strategy. Internal communications connected Nathan to the approval process. Archived files established Ava's authorship beyond dispute. Margaret asked the obvious question. Why not stop them now? Ava glanced toward the window where people crossed the park below like moving shadows. Then she answered softly, because if I stop them now, only a few people will know the truth. Margaret studied her face carefully. A slow understanding appeared in her expression. Ava was not preparing for a private correction. She was preparing for something much larger. As she left the office later that afternoon, her phone buzzed with a new notification from the television network. Final broadcast schedule confirmed. Ava opened the attachment and immediately noticed one detail. A live audience question segment had been added to the program. For the first time all week, she smiled. By the time Thursday evening arrived, the city seemed determined to celebrate. Manhattan shimmered beneath a sky of deep blue and silver, every tower glowing against the approaching night. Inside the television network headquarters, excitement moved through the building like electricity. Producers hurried between control rooms. Assistants checked schedules. Technicians adjusted cameras that would soon broadcast to millions of homes across the country. Ava stepped out of the elevator carrying a simple leather portfolio and wearing a dark red dress that reflected confidence rather than attention. No one stopped her. No one questioned her presence. Officially, she was still listed as a guest contributor to the initiative. Unofficially, she had already been erased from the story unfolding around her. She passed framed photographs of famous interviews and award-winning broadcasts while staff members moved around her with practiced urgency. Through an open doorway, she caught sight of the main studio. Bright lights hung from the ceiling like artificial stars. Large video screens displayed promotional graphics for the evening's special event. Rows of audience members were already filling their seats. The atmosphere felt polished, expensive, and carefully controlled. Exactly the kind of environment Nathan Whitmore preferred. Ava continued toward the private green room assigned to her. A young assistant greeted her politely and handed her a schedule packet. Ava thanked her and sat quietly near the window overlooking the city. From that room, she could watch a monitor carrying the live feed from the studio floor. The pre-show coverage had already begun. Then she saw Chloe. Chloe moved through the studio with the confidence of someone stepping into a future she believed already belonged to her. Makeup artists adjusted final details. Producers smiled approvingly. Network executives greeted her by name. Everything about the evening suggested she was the star attraction. Moments later, Nathan appeared beside her. His tailored navy suit looked flawless beneath the studio lights. He greeted sponsors, shook hands with executives, and smiled for photographs with the calm assurance of a man who believed every variable had been carefully managed. Ava watched them together through the monitor. Once, years ago, seeing Nathan smile had brought her comfort. Tonight it revealed something else. Confidence. Confidence built on the assumption that she would remain silent. The countdown clock appeared on the screen. 10 minutes until live broadcast. Audience members settled into their seats. Soft music filled the studio. A producer stepped in front of the cameras and reviewed final instructions. Chloe laughed at something Nathan said. The two looked completely at ease. Ava glanced down at her portfolio resting on her lap. Inside were documents capable of changing everything. Yet she felt no desire for revenge. What she wanted was simpler than that. Truth. For 6 years, she had accepted being overlooked. She had accepted being introduced as supportive rather than essential. She had accepted standing beside accomplishments she helped create while others received applause. Tonight was different. Tonight the lie would become public. And once a lie becomes public, the truth deserves the same opportunity. The red recording light illuminated above the main camera. The broadcast was beginning. Applause rolled through the studio. The host welcomed viewers across America. Nathan took his seat. Chloe sat beside him beneath a spotlight that seemed designed specifically for admiration. Ava remained alone in the green room, listening to every word. The audience applauded again as the host introduced Chloe as the visionary behind one of the nation's most successful educational initiatives. Nathan nodded. Chloe smiled. And Ava quietly looked at the clock on the wall. The evening was unfolding exactly as planned. The interview settled into a comfortable rhythm, the kind that made viewers believe they were witnessing something genuine. The host smiled warmly and praised the initiative's remarkable growth. Audience members nodded along as statistics appeared on the giant screens behind the stage. Millions of dollars in scholarships. Thousands of students served. Hundreds of community partnerships established across the country. Every accomplishment represented years of work. Every milestone carried Ava's fingerprints. Yet her name remained absent. Chloe answered each question with polished confidence. She spoke about vision, leadership, and commitment. She described challenges she had never personally faced and decisions she had never personally made. The audience rewarded her with admiration. Several times, applause echoed through the studio. Each round seemed louder than the last. From the green room, Ava watched quietly. Her expression never changed. The monitor reflected softly in her eyes as she listened to Chloe tell stories that belonged to someone else. Occasionally, the camera shifted toward Nathan. His role throughout the interview appeared simple. He validated everything Chloe said. Whenever the host praised her contributions, Nathan nodded. Whenever Chloe described a breakthrough moment, Nathan smiled. Whenever audience members applauded, Nathan joined them. More than once, he referred to Chloe as the driving force behind the initiative's success. Those words settled heavily inside the room. Ava glanced at the clock again. 8:12. Everything remained on schedule. Back on stage, the host introduced a video montage celebrating the organization's impact. Emotional music filled the studio as photographs appeared on screen. Students accepting scholarships. Families attending community events. Teachers receiving grants. New learning centers opening their doors. The audience watched with visible emotion. Several people wiped tears from their eyes. When the video ended, the applause lasted nearly 30 seconds. The host turned toward Chloe with admiration. "You should be proud," he said. "What you have built is extraordinary." Chloe smiled gracefully. "Thank you," she replied. "This mission has been my life's work." Ava lowered her gaze briefly. Not because the statement hurt, because it revealed how far the deception had gone. Chloe was no longer borrowing credit. She was beginning to believe it belonged to her. Nathan placed a supportive hand on the armrest beside her chair and smiled toward the audience. For a moment, he looked completely relaxed, completely secure, completely convinced that the story had already been rewritten. In the green room, Ava opened her portfolio. Inside were neatly organized folders containing years of records. Every document rested exactly where she had placed it. Every file carried dates, signatures, timestamps, and verifiable history. The truth was patient. It did not need applause. It did not need cameras. It only needed an opportunity. A producer suddenly appeared outside the green room door carrying a headset and clipboard. He stopped long enough to glance through the window before continuing down the hallway. Ava noticed something interesting. The energy inside the building had shifted. The interview was moving toward its final segment. She knew because she had studied the broadcast schedule carefully. On the monitor, the host leaned forward with renewed enthusiasm. "We have time for one final section before we close the program," he announced. Audience members straightened in their seats. Nathan smiled. Chloe smiled. The control room prepared for the transition. Ava slowly closed her portfolio and rose from her chair. Then the host delivered the words she had been waiting to hear all evening. "When we return, we will open the floor to live audience questions." For the first time that night, Nathan's perfect confidence was only minutes away from being tested. The audience returned from the commercial break energized and attentive. The studio lights brightened slightly as the host smiled toward the cameras. Across America, Millions of viewers settled back into their seats, expecting an ordinary conclusion to an inspiring interview. Nathan appeared relaxed. Chloe looked pleased. Both carried the confidence of people who believe the evening had already been won. The host thanked sponsors, acknowledged the audience, and introduced the final segment. A production assistant moved through the aisles carrying a microphone. Several audience members raised their hands eagerly. The first question came from a high school teacher in Ohio. Chloe answered smoothly. The second came from a nonprofit director in Texas. Nathan responded with practiced charm. Applause followed both exchanges. Everything seemed perfectly controlled. Then the host noticed another hand raised near the center aisle. He smiled and pointed in that direction. The camera turned. For a brief second, confusion crossed the faces of several crew members. Nathan's expression froze. Chloe stopped smiling. Slowly, Ava Brooks stood from her seat among the audience. The room grew noticeably quieter. She held no microphone yet. She simply stood with calm dignity, her dark red dress catching the glow of the studio lights. Some audience members recognized her name from older foundation events. Others did not. The host glanced toward his producers, then back toward Ava. Professional instinct took over. Live television left little room for hesitation. A microphone was handed to her. Nathan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Chloe looked toward him for reassurance. She did not receive it. Ava accepted the microphone and offered a polite smile. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was steady and warm. "Good evening. My name is Ava Brooks." A murmur moved through the audience. Nathan shifted slightly in his chair. Chloe kept her eyes fixed ahead. Ava continued. "First, I would like to congratulate everyone involved in expanding educational opportunities for students across the country. The work has changed many lives." The audience applauded softly. There was nothing confrontational in her tone, nothing dramatic. That made the tension stronger. The host nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, Ava. Do you have a question for our guests?" Ava smiled. "I do." She looked directly at Chloe. "You mentioned earlier that the original scholarship expansion model was developed during a strategy retreat in Denver 6 years ago. Could you tell us where that meeting was held?" Chloe blinked. The question seemed simple enough. "At a conference center outside the city," she answered. Ava nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting." She paused. "Because there was no strategy retreat in Denver that year. The expansion model was developed during a community workshop in Newark, New Jersey." The audience grew quiet. Chloe's smile weakened slightly. Nathan stared toward Ava without speaking. Ava continued with the same calm composure. "Perhaps you are thinking of a different project. Could you tell us the name of the first school district that joined the initiative?" Chloe hesitated. Only for a moment. But millions of viewers saw it. She offered an answer. Ava gently shook her head. "That is not correct either." The silence inside the studio deepened. No one was applauding now. No one was moving. Even the host appeared uncertain. Nathan's confidence had begun to fade. Chloe glanced toward him again. This time, his expression revealed something she had not expected. Concern. Ava lowered the microphone slightly and looked toward the stage. "I only asked because I was there when those decisions were made." The audience exchanged puzzled looks. The host leaned forward. Nathan's face lost its color. And for the first time that evening, the story everyone believed they understood began to unravel. For several seconds, no one spoke. The silence felt larger than the studio itself. The audience sat motionless beneath the bright lights, uncertain whether they were witnessing a misunderstanding or the beginning of something far more significant. Ava remained calm. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse anyone. She simply stood holding the microphone while the weight of her words settled over the room. The host cleared his throat and attempted a polite smile. "It sounds like you have been closely involved with the initiative." Ava nodded. "Very closely." Her answer was simple, but it carried a meaning that immediately drew the attention of every person watching. Chloe shifted slightly in her chair. The confidence that had carried her through the interview was beginning to fade. She forced a smile and tried to recover. "Many people contributed over the years," she said carefully. "Large projects involve many talented individuals." Ava smiled politely. "That is true." Then she asked another question. "Can you tell us what the original name of the literacy pilot program was before it expanded nationally?" Chloe hesitated again. The audience noticed. Nathan noticed. Millions of viewers noticed. She gave an answer that sounded reasonable. It was also wrong. Ava's expression never changed. The original program was called Open Doors. It operated from a church basement in Newark with 23 students and 4 volunteer tutors. The audience grew even quieter. The details sounded specific because they were. They sounded personal because they were. The host leaned forward. "How do you know that?" Ava looked toward the stage. "Because I created it." A wave of whispers moved through the crowd. Nathan immediately sat forward. For the first time that evening, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. Chloe's eyes widened. Ava continued before either of them could respond. 6 years ago, there was no national initiative. There was a folding table, borrowed office space, and a small group of students who needed help. Everything that exists today grew from that first program. The giant studio screens continued displaying photographs from the organization's history. Suddenly, the images seemed different. Viewers were no longer looking at a celebration. They were looking at evidence. The host glanced toward Nathan. "Is that accurate?" Nathan opened his mouth, then paused. The hesitation lasted only a second, but it felt much longer. Ava watched him carefully. Years earlier, she would have hoped he would finally tell the truth. Tonight, she no longer needed him to. Nathan eventually offered a diplomatic answer about teamwork, partnerships, and shared success. The audience listened politely, but the certainty that had existed earlier was gone. Questions had replaced admiration. Doubt had replaced applause. Ava lowered her microphone slightly. "I agree that success is shared," she said calmly. "That is why accurate history matters." Then she reached into her portfolio and removed a single folder. The motion was unhurried, deliberate. Every camera in the studio seemed drawn toward it. Chloe stared at the folder. Nathan stared at the folder. Even the host stopped speaking. Ava held it gently in her hands and looked toward the stage. "Before we continue," she said, "there is something everyone deserves to see." The control room suddenly became very busy, and on stage Nathan realized that the evening was no longer following the script he had written. No one in the studio tried to interrupt her. The atmosphere had shifted too dramatically for that. The audience watched with complete attention as Ava stepped forward and handed the folder to a production assistant standing near the stage. The assistant hesitated, looking toward the control room for guidance. A voice came through his earpiece. Moments later, he accepted the folder and carried it toward the producers. Nathan rose slightly from his chair. "I do not think this is the appropriate forum for internal documents," he said, attempting to regain control of the conversation. His voice remained calm, but the confidence that had defined the evening was beginning to crack. Ava looked at him with quiet composure. "The entire purpose of tonight's broadcast is transparency, opportunity, and truth," she replied. "I agree completely." Several audience members nodded. The host shifted uncomfortably but understood what every experienced broadcaster understands. Live television follows the story that unfolds in front of the cameras. And right now, the story belonged to Ava. A producer hurried across the edge of the studio floor carrying the folder. Inside the control room, documents were being reviewed at remarkable speed. The network's legal team joined the discussion. Senior executives leaned over computer screens. Within minutes, a decision was made. The host received instructions through his earpiece and glanced toward Ava with surprise. Then he looked directly into the nearest camera. "Our production team has verified several documents provided during this broadcast. In the interest of transparency, we are going to display some of that material for viewers." The audience immediately straightened in their seats. Nathan's expression hardened. Chloe looked visibly unsettled. The giant screens behind the stage flickered. For a moment they went dark. Then an image appeared. A project proposal dated 6 years earlier. At the top of the page, clearly visible to everyone, was a name. Ava Brooks, founder and development director. A murmur swept through the audience. The screen changed again. Another document appeared. Then another. Strategic plans. Community partnership agreements. Early funding requests. Educational pilot reports. Every one of them carried the same name. Ava Brooks. Chloe stared at the screens without speaking. Nathan's eyes remained fixed forward. The host looked genuinely stunned. "These documents appear to establish a significant leadership role," he said carefully. Ava nodded. "They established the original leadership role." Another screen appeared. This time it displayed archived emails, dates, timestamps, approval chains, development notes. The audience could follow the timeline themselves. The initiative's history unfolded in chronological order before millions of viewers. There was no dramatic accusation, no raised voices, just evidence. Clear, organized, verifiable. The most powerful kind of truth. Chloe finally spoke. Many people contributed to the project. Her voice sounded smaller than before. Ava smiled gently. That is correct. Then she pointed toward one of the displayed emails. Would you like to explain why that message refers to me as the sole project architect? Silence answered her question. Across America, viewers watched the same documents appear on their screens. Social media began reacting instantly. Journalists started posting screenshots. Commentators began asking questions. What had started as a celebration was transforming into an investigation. The host turned toward Nathan. Were you aware of these records? Nathan opened his mouth. The answer seemed obvious. The documents included approvals carrying his own signature. For the first time all evening, he had nowhere to hide. Ava remained perfectly calm as the giant screens continued revealing page after page of history. Years of work, years of sacrifice, years of truth. And as the final document appeared behind the stage, the audience collectively realized something extraordinary. The woman they had been told was a guest had actually been the author of the entire story. For a moment, the studio seemed suspended between two versions of reality. One version had been carefully presented for the entire evening. The other was now impossible to ignore. The giant screens behind the stage remained illuminated with documents, signatures, emails, and records that traced the initiative's history back to its beginning. The evidence spoke with a clarity no public relations strategy could overcome. The audience looked from the screens to Ava, then back again. What had started as admiration for a celebrated success story had become respect for the woman who had actually built it. The host sat quietly for several seconds before finally speaking. I think everyone watching tonight understands that these contributions deserve recognition. His words were measured, but they carried weight. Across America, viewers had already reached the same conclusion. Social media feeds filled with reactions. Journalists posted updates. Former partners, educators, and community leaders began sharing their own experiences working with Ava over the years. The truth was spreading faster than any prepared narrative ever could. Nathan remained seated beneath the bright studio lights. For the first time in many years, there was no carefully managed statement available to him. No strategy meeting. No communications team. No private boardroom. Only the truth. He looked toward Ava. The woman standing before him was the same person who had spent years helping students find opportunities, helping families navigate challenges, and helping organizations serve communities with dignity. Yet somehow he had convinced himself that her voice could be removed from the story she created. Chloe lowered her eyes. The confidence that had defined her earlier appearance had disappeared entirely. The audience no longer viewed her as a visionary. They viewed her as someone standing inside another person's accomplishments. Ava felt no satisfaction in that. Humiliation had never been her goal. Recognition was. Accuracy was. Truth was. The host turned toward her once more. After everything that has happened tonight, what would you like people to remember? The studio became completely silent. Ava held the microphone gently and considered the question. Then she smiled. I would like them to remember the students. Several audience members nodded immediately. Because this was never supposed to be about publicity. It was never supposed to be about who received applause. It was supposed to be about creating opportunities for people who needed them. Her voice remained calm and steady. The work matters. The students matter. The truth matters. The audience began applauding softly. Then louder still. People rose from their seats one by one until the entire studio was standing. The applause rolled through the room like a wave. Not for a celebrity. Not for a billionaire. Not for a carefully crafted public image. For Ava, the woman who had chosen dignity over anger. The woman who had chosen evidence over accusation. The woman who had trusted the truth enough to let it speak for itself. Nathan listened to the applause and understood something that no amount of money could purchase. Respect cannot be manufactured. It must be earned. When the broadcast finally ended, crew members moved across the studio floor and audience members slowly began departing. Ava gathered her portfolio and walked toward the exit. She did not stop for interviews. She did not seek attention. She simply walked forward. As she reached the doors leading out to the Manhattan night, she glanced once through the glass. The city stretched before her in 1,000 points of light. Somewhere behind her, an old story was ending. Ahead of her, a new one was beginning. And this time, everyone knew who had written it.